After 5 years of estrangement, my father recently contacted me, leading me to reflect on whether I acted correctly when he and I last parted ways. At the age of 26, shortly after my college graduation, my dad abruptly kicked me out of the house. This sudden decision followed accusations made by my stepmother and stepsister, who claimed I had stolen my stepsister's college savings. This event was the culmination of ongoing tension since my father had remarried. My parents divorced when I was 7, and by the time I was 15, my dad began dating Ellie, my future stepmother. Ellie was a widow, with a daughter, Sophia, who was 4 years younger than me. From the first meeting, I sensed a reluctance from Ellie and Sophia to accept me, a feeling that persisted and grew over the years. Although I moved out for college, my visits home were fraught with discomfort, as Ellie and Sophia's coldness became increasingly apparent. My father, however, believed they harboured no ill feelings towards me, which only deepened the divide between us. Upon graduation, I returned home with plans to save money for my own place. I hoped to discuss the palpable hostility I felt with my father, but he dismissed my concerns, convinced of Ellie and Sophia's affection towards me. However, it didn't take long to see that their disdain was quite real. Matters escalated when Ellie and Sophia accused me of a grave misdeed. After a day spent house hunting to escape the toxic household atmosphere, I returned home to a grim scene. My father, clearly upset, immediately ordered me to leave, accusing me of stealing Sophia's college fund, an accusation that Ellie amplified with vehement accusations, falsely claiming I had misused access to a financial account meant for emergencies. Confused and hurt by the accusations and my father's readiness to believe them without my side of the story, I was forced to leave, severing ties. Now, after years of reflection and silence from my father, the sudden reconnection brings these old wounds to the forefront, prompting me to question the past and whether I handled the situation as best as I could. I had no idea why my stepmother Ellie accused me of using money meant for her daughter. She claimed I had splurged on expensive brands, funding a shopping spree with cash set aside for her child. This was completely false, yet she convinced my father by planting the purchased items in my room. My protests fell on deaf ears. My father had already sided with her, having found the stash under my bed earlier. When I suggested verifying the accusations with the bank, my father refused, convinced of my guilt. He labelled me a thief. And despite my efforts to prove my innocence, he wouldn't listen. Heartbroken and maligned, I moved out, lost contact with him, and struggled financially for a while. However, I eventually found my footing, built a comfortable life, and even planned to buy a house. For 5 years, I avoided any contact with my father's side of the family. During this time, my mother supported me, having severed ties with him for his treatment of me. Then, unexpectedly, my father showed up at my new home, seeking forgiveness. He had finally learned the truth. Ellie had concocted the whole scenario to cover her misuse of funds meant for her daughter's college. She had bought lavish items for herself and her daughter, then framed me to make my father pay for the expenses, fearing he would see her as a gold digger. Recently, after a dispute with her parents, they revealed everything to my father, exposing Ellie's manipulation. Now, understanding the full extent of her deceit, my father was asking for a chance to make amends. It turned out that my stepmother had been using me as a pawn in her scheme to secure her financial future without exposing her own extravagances. My dad had recently told me that he had filed for divorce from Ellie a few weeks ago with the assistance of his old lawyer. Now, he was looking to mend our relationship. During our conversation, he mentioned that he knew one of my friend's fathers was a well-respected divorce attorney. My dad hoped I would help him connect with this attorney and possibly negotiate a reduced fee because Ellie and her lawyer had crafted a very biased divorce petition. He seemed to believe that an apology might smooth things over, and then he could ask for my help as if nothing had happened between us. The audacity of his request left me so flabbergasted that I couldn't help but laugh before firmly closing the door on him. The idea that after everything he would simply expect me to assist him was absurd to me. If he needed a lawyer, he should reach out himself and pay the standard fees like anyone else would. His current lawyer's reluctance to handle the messy divorce due to complications and impending retirement was not my burden to bear. After shutting the door, I warned him to leave, or I'd call the police. I thought that was the end of it until my mother called. To my surprise, she criticised my decision not to help him. She argued that everyone makes mistakes, including my father, and that it wasn't fair to hold him to a higher standard just because he was my dad. While I understood that people make mistakes, my issue was deeper. It stemmed from his choice to trust Ellie over me, his own daughter, and the hurtful things he had said when he drove me out of our home. Despite it all, he hadn't come just to apologise. He also came wanting my help. I suspected if he hadn't needed something, I wouldn't have seen him at all. It took him 5 years to acknowledge his mistake, and now he was back not just to make amends, but to ask for a favour. I tried to explain to my mother that my reluctance wasn't about his past mistakes, but about how he had prioritised Ellie over me, causing significant emotional pain. She insisted that his admission of his wrongs, albeit delayed, should count for something, and urged me to forgive him and be the bigger person. While I am close to my friend, and it's likely I could talk to him about his father taking on my dad's case, I find myself torn. The emotional toll of reconnecting under these circumstances is daunting. I'm not sure I can simply set aside the past, despite the possible expectations to extend help. I found myself in a heated debate with my mother about whether I should help my estranged father get a cheaper rate from a top divorce attorney. The best lawyers are expensive, and I wasn't even sure if I could manage to convince anyone to lower their fees. My mother couldn't see my perspective, and I struggled to grasp her viewpoint, which seemed completely illogical to me. The argument left us both frustrated and not speaking to each other, and it made me question my decisions. Reflecting on the situation, I wasn't sure if refusing to help my father was wrong, but my mother's reaction suggested otherwise. I felt torn, wondering if maybe I had made a mistake. After some thought and seeing comments from others, I've decided to distance myself from both my parents. It's clear that I owe my father nothing, especially since his apology came so shortly after he realised the truth, indicating he likely wouldn't have reached out if he didn't need something from me. As for my mother, I'm puzzled by her sudden support for my father after years of silence between them. During our last conversation, she mentioned that my father had contacted her, tearfully trying to reconnect, which is uncharacteristic of him as he rarely shows his emotions. This was enough for her to listen to him, which led to her finding out about his attempt to apologise to me. Despite this, she claimed they hadn't been in contact for the past 5 years, which I find hard to believe. The whole scenario has made me realise that perhaps my mother doesn't understand me as well as I thought. If she truly knew me, she wouldn't have expected me to forgive my father so readily. For now, I've resolved to keep my distance from both my parents. It's been easy to avoid my father since I've been doing it for 5 years, but distancing myself from my mother will be much harder. She has been my main family connection for years, and losing that bond pains me. I plan to give her a week to reflect and possibly apologise for her reaction. If not, I'll have to accept that my relationship with her may be another casualty in this ongoing family strife. It's a tough situation, but there's not much more I can do. I need to protect my own emotional well-being and move forward with or without their understanding. I've given my mother a week to reconsider her stance and potentially apologise. If she can acknowledge where she might have misunderstood me, that would be wonderful. However, if she doesn't come around, I'm facing the heart-wrenching possibility of having to sever ties permanently. The thought alone is deeply upsetting, but I must prioritise my own well-being. Before the week was up, my mum reached out not with an apology, but with a request to visit and talk things through in person. Hoping for reconciliation, I agreed. When she arrived, she initiated the conversation by admitting she might not have fully tried to understand my perspective during our last discussion. Encouraged, I repeated my feelings, hoping it would pave the way for her apology so we could put this behind us. However, instead of apologising after hearing me out, she suggested I have the same discussion with my father. She believed that if I could explain myself with composure, it might help mend things. She reminded me that despite his mistakes, believing I had misused Ellie's money, he had protected me from legal consequences, which, in her view, showed he still cared. She pressed that I should at least offer him an explanation, insisting I was raised to be kind and understanding. I was disheartened and told her that she really didn't know me as well as she thought. I felt no obligation to forgive or explain anything to my father, given his past actions. I was hurt that she hadn't apologised for her part in this and told her I would only be willing to communicate further if she was ready to genuinely apologise. As our conversation became more tense, she became visibly nervous and admitted she couldn't leave without fulfilling a promise to my father to persuade me to talk to him. She pleaded with me, saying that family should be there to forgive each other, and it would be tragic to live otherwise. I dismissed this as empty rhetoric and asked her to leave, upset that her visit was more about fulfilling her promise to my father than genuinely repairing our relationship. In that moment, she finally expressed sorrow, realising perhaps too late that her approach might cause her to lose me. Her apology seemed tied to her obligations to my father, rather than a sincere understanding of my feelings. This realisation only added to the complexity of our situation, leaving me to navigate these turbulent family dynamics while trying to protect my emotional health. I felt a deep sense of betrayal from both my parents, but part of me still thought that, as my parents, perhaps I should forgive them. They had, after all, done many things right in the past, and that should count for something. But when my mother tried to use this reasoning to justify her actions, it felt ridiculous to me. I confronted her about making promises to my father that she might not keep, stressing that it wasn't my job to help her fulfill these commitments. The conversation escalated when she admitted she couldn't leave because my father was outside, waiting in the car, hoping to be invited in. This revelation was the last straw for me. I had explicitly told her I didn't want to meet him, yet she disregarded my wishes, thinking she could persuade me otherwise. My frustration boiled over into anger, and I couldn't hold back my emotions. I yelled, telling her she was a terrible mother and declaring that I was done with her. Despite her tears and apologies, my mind was made up. The argument dragged on for about 15 minutes before she finally left, and as she did, I warned her that any return visit from her or my father would prompt me to call the police. After she left, I even considered speaking to a lawyer about obtaining a protective order against them. Then, out of nowhere, another unexpected event unfolded today that added to the chaos. I was enjoying a day off at home, planning a quiet day, when Ellie and her daughter Sophia appeared at my doorstep. Initially, I was ready to send them away immediately, and even started to dial the police. But Ellie quickly interjected, insisting she wasn't there to cause trouble, but rather to reveal some truths about my father, and explain why my mother had suddenly sided with him after years of silence. Her presence was as unpleasant as ever, and initially I had no desire to hear her out. Yet, something she mentioned about my mother caught me off guard and piqued my curiosity. Reluctantly, I listened as she stayed outside, refusing even to enter my house. Ellie shared that a couple of weeks ago, her parents had disclosed some critical information about the incident that had happened 5 years ago to my father, which sparked a series of unexpected revelations and confrontations. This twist in the story was surprising. I hadn't anticipated Ellie, of all people, would come forward with information potentially explaining recent tensions and alignments within my family. Her news was unexpected, complicating my feelings about the family dynamics I thought I understood. Ellie revealed that she had stopped sending money to her parents because my father was no longer giving her the kind of financial support she wanted. She had grown too greedy, and when the funds dwindled, she started investigating. Her snooping led to a shocking discovery. My dad was having an affair with my mother, and she suspected he was stashing money in preparation to leave her. Determined to not be left empty-handed, Ellie decided to stay with him, planning to initiate the divorce on her own terms eventually. However, my dad uncovered her plan, sparking a massive fight that exposed their true motives to each other. Under normal circumstances, my dad could have easily divorced Ellie without much loss, but his own infidelity complicated things. Ellie hadn't worked in 10 years, and she crafted a divorce petition to her advantage, which my dad contested fiercely. Ellie told me all this because recently, my father had threatened her during a phone call, warning her that I was supposed to connect him with a powerhouse divorce attorney, which would leave her in a disadvantageous position. He was bluffing, but Ellie, fearing the worst, decided to tell me everything. I was stunned by these revelations, but they explained my mother's odd behaviour and sudden alliance with my father. After sharing the details, Ellie left it up to me whether I wanted to assist my dad or not. For once, Ellie had actually been useful to me, and I was oddly grateful for her honesty. But this was the final straw with my parents. I couldn't believe my mother had tried to manipulate me into giving my dad another chance for her own selfish reasons. My parents were truly suited for each other, and I was better off without them in my life. I'm living on my own and genuinely enjoying the peace. Occasionally, I miss my mother, but I quickly remind myself of her betrayal, which makes it easier to cope with her absence. I've heard through relatives that my dad and mum are back together and that his divorce with Ellie was finalised a few weeks ago. There's a wedding planned soon, and although I've been informed about it in case I wanted to reconcile, I have no interest in attending or mending things with them. Life on my own has been fulfilling and peaceful. I'm content with where I am, far removed from the drama and manipulation that once dominated my life.
Thanks for joining me on this wild ride. If you loved this story, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more shocking tales of family drama and Reddit gold. Want to hear another crazy story? Click the video right here. Until next time, stay curious.